So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay. This one's going to be a siege battle on the new and improved Rivendell, although not so new anymore to be fair, because the old version of Rivendell has not been seen for quite some time. But this is, of course, was one of WK's first creations, I believe. I think Adorus was the first, but I believe this was the second, and this one was built from the ground up pretty much, other than this section over here. So it's always good to see this, and it's going to be another encounter between the elves and the dwarves, just like the last battle we saw on the icy river crossing. And it's going to be a little bit different than last time. For instance, there are a few more factions than just two involved, but for the most part, a siege battle, of course, entails quite a lot of heavy choke point fighting. So we'll see how the introduction of another Dwarven and another Elven faction changes the dynamics in this sort of fight, because it is not simply going to be Linden versus Erebor in this one, although they are both still involved. We'll go through the attacking army compositions first for the Dwarves, and we will start off with the player who sent me the replay as we find his army underneath the trees, and that's going to be Sareg, who is playing as the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm. Now, Khazad-dûm offer you something a little bit different from Erebor. They, for example, can contest the long-range game, which is something that Erebor struggled with a little bit in the last game. The abundance of Linden archers made it a little bit difficult for them to get into range without key units being focused down by the Linden archers. Khazad-dûm, however, can contest this with the Orc Hunters, which we can see here. The Orc Hunters are not great in a skirmish fight, to be honest, unlike pretty much the entirety of the rest of the Khazad-dûm roster. They are not particularly strong against arrows, but having said that, they do have high damage. They are essentially Elven archers with a different skin on them. They have good archer damage, which is higher than standard archers from other factions, so they can still do a decent job for you. They are fairly expensive for what they offer, but just the fact that the dwarves can get into a long-range fight is a big deal. Khazad-dûm also have, well, this is actually their elites, but they also have the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, which are, of course, axe throwers. They have the throne trait as well, so they can be used to hard counter units with the elephant tags. Obviously, this includes Mumakil and the chariot units. The Khazad-dûm Reclaimers obviously very, very deadly at range and strong in melee as well. Obviously, Erebor do have the iron for axe throwers, but they are more of a journeyman axe thrower unit, whereas the Khazad-dûm Reclaimer is one of the stronger hand-throwing projectile units in the game. We also have the Mithril Guard. You can see that the unit scaling is not actually on particularly high, so that means the frame rate should be pretty smooth, considering both the elves and the dwarves don't have the largest unit counts anyway. We have the Mithril Guard, which are armor piercing, and considering their foes, that armor piercing might actually come in handy in this battle. Obviously the Mithril Guard, very, very strong indeed. And then we also have the Sons of the Fallen, which are a higher tier spear unit, and here is a good opportunity to talk about Khazad-dûm's very strong infantry. In general, Khazad-dûm, they do not have the same variety of cavalry as Erebor, nor do they have the close range punch of their crossbows, but in general their infantry is going to be very strong indeed. And in a situation like this, in a siege battle, that can prove to be a real difference maker. Obviously the Sons of the Fallen, very, very strong spearmen, and over here we can see that Balin is going to be in the guards of Khazad-dûm. I think they are the only sword and board unit, well, weapon and board unit in the game that has 3 hit points. I could be wrong about that. But I'm not thinking of any others off the top of my head in this version anyway. But obviously the guards of Khazad-dûm are really very, very resilient. Even the elves will struggle to kill them off quickly. And then we can see over here the rest of his army. He's actually gone for a very elite army, which in this situation could prove to be a good idea. We've got the First Legion Pikes, which they do have a slight shield value, but even so you kind of want to keep them away from arrow fire because they will still be focused down if they are seen. But they are one of the finest pike units in the game. They are not as strong as the Karas Galadhon's Guardians from Lothlorien, but that's just because they're multiple HP, so they stand out from the rest of the pikemen quite substantially because of that. But the First Legion Pikes and the Narun Aru Sentinels are really fighting it out for the second spot. And with 2 units of them, if they get set up into a position and they start boxing the elves in, it could get pretty ugly pretty quick for them. And then we've got 2 units of Warriors of Khazad-dûm with the armor upgrade, the old Iron Guard model from Vanilla. Obviously these 2 will be used then pushing the ram, which I don't actually think they need a ram on Rivendell, but nonetheless these 2 can just be used in a little bit more freely than the rest of Khazad-dûm's more elite roster. Over onto the other side we have another Khazad-dûm army played by Proxima Centauri, and there might be a few hidden units in these trees, but we can see that he's got a lot of rather dirty looking 4th Legion Shield Guard. And the 4th Legion Shield Guard are quite interesting because they do not suffer from the spear malus, but they maintain all of the benefits of being spearmen, and this is really one of the real selling points of the Khazad-dûm army in general. They do not have their armor upgrade this time, but if I did have a criticism about the 4th Legion, it's they kind of make the 3rd Legion a little bit redundant, because while the 3rd Legion are actually stronger at fighting infantry, as you would expect, the lack of a spear malice on the 4th Legion does mean that you could bring them and they will still act as line infantry, while being good against cavalry, while having more mass and all that sort of thing. And it's one of the really strong points about Khazad-dûm, that they are able to bring such a unit. More 4th Legion over here. We do actually see some 3rd Legion though, so good to see them nonetheless. They do not have the armour upgrades either, but again, they are still very, very strong infantry. As far as line infantry goes, there are very few factions which can match them, but we might see some today in the elves. We've got more orc hunters, of course. Good to see a lot of archers as well, to make sure that the elves don't have impunity in the ranged fight like they did in the last game, which really did help them an awful lot. Then back here we get into the elites. Once again, Balin in another unit of guards of Khazad-dûm. We have another unit of Mithril Guard, more Khazad-dûm Reclaimers. We actually do see the Legion Bodyguard over here as well, which are kind of like if you're a little bit strapped for cash, then instead of getting the Mithril Guard or the Guards of Khazad-dûm, you can get the Legion Bodyguard and they will still do a very fine job for you. And then we've got the Sons of the Fallen over here as well. So obviously, again, a focus on elite units over here. They might need a little bit more manpower if they're going to get into a grindy fight with the elves, but it looks as though all of the Dwarven armies have gone for relatively high tier picks. And finally we have Windy Pops, who is playing as Erebor, so we should see some of Erebor's strengths as well brought to the table. And you can see Dane is going to be with the Highborns, which very similar to the Legion Bodyguard, you know, in terms of what they offer you. And then we've got some Ironfoot Warriors, again, armour upgrades all around, more Ironfoot Warriors, so they should be pretty good at taking the initial volleys of Arrow Fire. We saw in the last battle between the elves and the dwarves that even though the dwarves are good at taking arrow fire, they cannot take it continuously and still expect to win. We've got some Dwarven Miners just as some chaff, and then over here we have the elites. We have the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, the Obsidian Guard. We have some Ironfoot Crossbows, of course, for that close range punch, which provided they don't get focused down, this time we might see them perform really well. Some Ironfoot Axe Throwers in here as well, so quite a lot of range power from Erebor. And then finally, we do have a unit of cavalry. We have the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, which if they get loose inside Rivendell's settlement and start running around, they could prove to be a real problem for the elves to slow down. But now, we shall get into the settlement itself, and we shall start off with this sort of frontal defence. You can see that Warking is going to be playing as Imladris, and Klazar is going to be playing as Linden. So Linden, we should be seeing again how they dealt with the dwarves last time was a combination of strong pike blocks and their javelins, in addition to the artillery, but the javelins I think were the real MVPs last time. Imladris, on the other hand, will deal with the dwarves in a very different way. They obviously do not have the dearth of javelins that Linden have. They do have pikes, but they won't generally be able to bring the Imladris sentries in huge numbers. So they will go for a more direct approach, and they will simply contest the melee fight and try and slug it out with the dwarves, and on average they are able to do this. Simply because Imladris have got the highest total defense values on average of any faction in the game. This comes down to the fact that obviously they have the Elven skill, but also they combine this with high armor values, which means they are very, very strong all around. It can be very, very difficult to break down. We've seen in the past full Eldar Enway armies work well when people were not expecting it. Even with their very low numbers, they're just so difficult to bring down that they were able to see the game through. We've got some Four Linden Archers with some Imladris sentries over here, so both these armies are going to be combined together, and they're going to be backed up by some Four Linden Pikemen as well. And then back here we've got more polearms in Imladris sentries and Eldar Atar. So obviously this is a lot of polearms here. Now the dwarves can force their way through polearms, but this many might be a little bit more difficult. Eldar Quinga, so some more lower tier archers, but again the Elven archers are going to have to pick their targets here because the dwarves of course are quite resilient to that sort of thing. Some more Four Linden Pikemen back here. We've also got some Noldorin Guard. Noldorin Guard, pretty much a unit which would be very much at home in Imladris, considering their very high armour values, as well as their high skill values, but of course it's Linden's only really heavily armoured unit, a very key part of their army as well, with the inspiration they offer. Harlinden Infantry and Four Linden Marines, unsurprising to see both of those units, obviously Javelins, and then the Harlinden Infantry, a very cost-effective frontline unit in this sort of situation. Mythalon Marines as well, so again, line infantry javelin hybrids. We saw the Linden Javelins be used to such good effect last time. Four Linden Pikemen and some more Four Linden Archers. This defensive position a little bit more thin on the ground, but there is also more room for the archers to get some crossfire off over here, whereas this mound is kind of in the way on the other side, so that might be intentional. Some more Four Linden Marines, some more Noldorin Guard, and some Harlinden Infantry back here. As we get closer towards the town centre, we can see some Eldar Makar, which essentially they and the Harlinden Infantry are mostly interchangeable. I mean, there are stat differences between the two, but for the most part they will fulfil the same role. They do not have the armour upgrade though. And then back here we can see the Imladris General is going to be the Gwaith I Arthand, which multiple HP spears. Very, very resilient, but obviously as spears they aren't going to be quite as good at killing things as non-spear infantry would be, but even so, very, very tough to bring down, even for the dwarves. So the Gwaith I Arthand, especially if they're backed up, should be able to last quite a long time. Some Imladris Blade Masters. Their sort of unique selling point next to the other heavy elven swordsmen of a similar cost is the fact they do have an anti-cavalry bonus. Now that might come in handy if the Ironfoot Hammer Guard start rampaging around the city, but for the most part they will just be here for their expertise in melee with other infantry, which is still substantial. Some Mithlon pikemen. Again, I'm not really too surprised to see Lyndon go heavy on the pikes here and letting Imladris maybe take a little bit more of the slack on the infantry front. More Mithlon Marines. We've got some Wardens of Elos Tyrion as well. Again, not surprising to see the Rangers. They were a factor in the last battle as well. We've got some Noldorin Blade Masters, which 1-1 going to be difficult for the dwarves to bring down again, as well as some more. Those aren't Noldorin Blade Masters. These are Mithlon pikemen. And then down here we can see that an Imladris defense, Imladris Guardians, which are very strong sword and board units. Obviously, you can only have 2 before the cost increases. They are really very, very expensive, but they are slightly stronger than the likes of the Castamir's Legion, the Guardians of Kharndun, that sort of thing. This is the sort of thing you can expect from the Imladris Guardians. They do not have their armour upgrade though. There's 2 units of them here. We've also got some Elder Enway Heru Hatal, which as far as heavy elven spears go, obviously the spear malices don't tend to hit them as much because of their much higher skill values. And then we've got some Harlingen Guard over here as well with those shields. And then finally, some Harlingen Guard up here, but there may very well, and indeed there is, a few units up on this cliffside over here. Some nice low-res water down there. That's the price you pay for going on some lower settings sometimes. Eldar Enway Heru Quinga, obviously the Elder Enway archers. Once the target of my ire, no longer. They're now just fine. They're quite expensive, but then you get what you pay for. Godhelm Einau, which again they are don't have their armour upgrades either. Previously, as the Noldor Elder nobles, they were wretchedly overpowered as well, but now they are not. You don't actually see them an awful lot now, but then Imladris is a faction that I don't tend to see an awful lot anyway. Elder Enway Heru Hatal up here as well, and then there are a few more units down on this cliffside path over here, presumably more Imladris forces. Indeed it is. We've got some more Eldar Atar, some more Imladris Guardians, and a unit of Noritano warriors. Now there will be a little cut, because on Rivendell the deployment zones are such that 2 of the attacking armies have to sort of circumvent these cliff walls and meet up with their ally, but I will rejoin the battle when the assault is beginning. I'm not entirely sure what the Orc Hunts of Khazad-dûm hope to accomplish by shooting in such a wide arc. It's unlikely that many of these arrows are going to find their mark at all. I mean, they will hit a few of these pikemen, but it's unlikely they'll get a huge amount of kills. You can't really afford to waste ammunition in such a way. They would honestly be much better off trying to just trade with the Elven skirmishes and trying to shoot right into the front of this pike wall, because there isn't really any Elven skirmishes in extremely close proximity, so they don't have the most dangerous approach, to be honest with you. If you just place them here, they would have a much better shot, as opposed to trying to arc their shots all the way over this large mountain. But I did actually make a larger cut than I was expecting to here. I mean, I do know that Rivendell, it takes some time to manoeuvre around, but I also suppose that based on the fact that this is on a smaller unit scaling, that when the battle begins it will probably resolve itself more quickly as a result of there being less manpower to play with. As we look over here though, we can see Sarag has still got some way to go before he encounters any significant Elven resistance. There's this sort of patch of Elven troops up here on this hill. I think, yeah, they've got the Noritano warriors, they've got the God Helim, so certainly Khazad-dûm will not be able to, and the Heru Quinga I should say. But they don't really have too many options. I mean, on Rivendell they can just push through though. Khazad-dûm, I would say they are in a fairly decent position to just try and absorb all the fire that comes their way. And there is also the fact, of course, that the attacking armies outnumber the defending armies, so the onus is certainly on them to move forward. Meanwhile, we can now see that the dwarves are getting into a better position to start shooting the pike block with the Orc Hunters moving forward. And it does look as though Proxima Centuri over on this side is going to be the first one in, with a few reinforcing units of Ironfoot from Erebor. And that's understandable if Khazad-dûm is going to take the initial lead on this assault, purely because they have the archers available to them, whereas Erebor, of course, do not. Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised actually that Linden do not have archers closer, and in fact I think now they are moving over a unit of archers, yeah, the Eldar Winger, because this pike wall, unsupported by archers, if they take continual fire in the front from the Orc Hunters, they will take some substantial losses, especially the Linden pikes. They will not like being hit by arrow fire at all. Now we can see that the Eldar Winger shooting in with their fire ammunition. I'm unsure whether the fire ammunition glitch still holds true, but at one point, using fire ammunition on lower tier archers gave them body piercing, which was a very strange thing indeed. These Orc Hunters, looks like we're just going to be seeing a bit of a skirmish fight initially. As the fire arrows come in. And I think the Orc Hunters are just going to be going for the pike wall. Meanwhile, if we go and have a look over here, we can see more skirmishers getting into position. Ironfoot crossbows moving up on this side, so Erebor sending forward their crossbowmen. I probably would have been very tempted to save at least one unit of the crossbows for later on, but it looks as though they're having a fairly decent initial skirmish with these Elven archers, but then the Elven archers, they aren't exactly banked up to overwhelm the Dwarven skirmishers. Gone for less archers than we saw from Linden last time in the river crossing battle. This time they've gone for a little bit more of an infantry heavy approach, which, considering Imladris are heavily involved in this defence, is maybe not too much of a surprise. These Eldar Winger over here, whilst continuing to use their fire ammunition, doing a decent amount of damage here to the Orc Hunters. It's still a bit of an awkward shot for both units. I mean, the Orc Hunters are able to get some nice hits here onto the front of this pike wall, and they are getting some good kills here on the Eldar Atar. However, the Imladris Sentry is going to be able to withstand a little bit more so than the other pikemen because they have higher armour. Higher armour values. A couple of them are falling by the wayside. Just softening them up for the main assault, and there are still plentiful units of Orc Hunters to go. I think over here we should be nearly to the point where the elves could be getting in range of Khazad-dûm. The Sons of the Fallen and the Meteorial Guard moving up first, so Sarag not backwards and coming forwards. He's going to be committing quite a lot of his higher tier units to the initial engagements. Ironfoot crossbowmen, they're taking a bit of counterfire, but again the Ironfoot crossbows should be relatively okay as long as they aren't taking fire from several units of Elven archers. Obviously those shields, that armour is going to help them a fair amount, although the crossbows are now moving a bit too far forwards, and this is going to prompt the Harlanden infantry to move forward and engage them in melee. Based on how long this fight is, I would imagine that once the melee engagements start, things are going to start to heat up relatively quickly. So I wouldn't expect this elongated skirmish fight to continue for too much longer. The Harlanden infantry have caught the Ironfoot crossbows in melee, and the Ironfoot crossbows will not stand to... Oh, that's a very strange decision there from Klazar, to charge forward and then to immediately turn their backs on the crossbows. If you were going to charge forward, you should have realised that you were going to take some losses while you were in there. Just stopping the crossbowmen from firing would have honestly probably been worth it. Maybe moving up, maybe a bit of a counter-assault here from Linden, pushing outwards, trying to deal with the crossbowmen. As it was, that didn't really accomplish too much other than get a few more elves killed. Orc Hunters continuing to fire into this front line. Fire ammunition continuing to be shot back at them. Still not much movement on this side. Meanwhile, I'm surprised that Imladris have not opened up their range fire yet over on this side. They've got enough archers here to cause some serious damage, even to strong units like the Sons of the Fallen. Especially seeing as pretty much Sareg's entire army is pushing along this side. And I would imagine he's just going to try and keep up a push using his momentum. Now we can see that the fire ammunition starting to open up, starting to rain down on the Khazad-dûm army as they approach up the cliffside path. I'm not sure how long this Elven front line is going to hold if Khazad-dûm's army simply uses their weight. The Eldar Atar will not be able to keep their shape in the face of a Dwarven mass push. The Heru Hatal will be able to put up a decent fight, but in the numbers they're in, particularly seeing as Sarag is pushing forward a lot of his units quite quickly, and you can see that a lot of these arrows are simply being buried into the floor. The archers really need to be right on the edge of the cliffside if they're going to get the most out of their ammunition. Too much ammo being wasted, really. In a defensive situation like this, oftentimes your ranged firepower needs to be utilised to its fullest effect, and so far I don't think the defenders have done that. It'll be doubly important when you're up against a faction like Khazad-dûm, who are just naturally quite good at withstanding ranged firepower. While the dwarves slowly but surely edging their way towards the Elven front line as the fire ammunition continues to rain down. Very slowly moving in. In fact, I think we'll probably have time to go and have a look at what's going on over here. The Dwarven crossbows still, but actually as we go through this valley, a push has been made, and we can see the 4th Legion Shield Guard pushing into this pike line and actually bisecting it in places, causing some real problems for the Linden sections of the line. But Clazar immediately moving forward to patch up the line with a unit of Noldering Guard, and that should turn the fight around in favour of the Elves once again. The Dwarves need to be prepared to send up another wave here, because the 4th Legion Shield Guard will not be able to win this fight all on their lonesome, even though it says victory seems certain. They've managed to buckle the pike formations, but with the addition of units like Noldering Guard, this fight is going to turn in favour of the Elves. But fortunately, the Dwarves are sending up reinforcements, units of 3rd Legion, so this assault is likely to manage to maintain its momentum for the time being. Meanwhile, over here, some significantly stronger units in the shape of the Sons of the Fallen and the Mithril Guard pushing in. Obviously the Mithril Guard with their AP going to be very, very useful for helping to deal with the Eldar Enway Haru Hatal. The Eldar Atar as well, probably not the kind of unit in this situation that's going to be all that helpful. They're not going to be able to deal damage quickly enough, and they are thoroughly outclassed. They can be a pretty good tool for holding out outer defences when they're dealing with sort of lower tier initial assaults, the sort of which the Orcs usually traffic in. But here, Sareg has decided to push up some very elite units very quickly, and that's likely to have a pretty detrimental impact here on the Imladris front line. Already I would actually say that Imladris need to think about falling their skirmishes back, because the Dwarves are going to make pretty quick work of this outer defence. This layer was not thick enough, it did not have the elite units necessary to deal with Khazad-dûm when they came forward in this strength. Meanwhile, here we go. 3rd Legion sort of slowly but surely marching their way forward. There's actually a few units getting in the way here. The Eldar Quinga slowing their advance. The Ironfoot Hammer Guard are coming forward, although the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, it looked as though they initially sprinted into the stakes and lost one of their unit models for their trouble. But actually the 4th Legion are doing really very well. Now with the help of the 3rd Legion able to push around, this is a very odd decision. The Ironfoot Hammer Guard charging in to try and reinforce, but with the pikes in close proximity, all that's likely to do is to get some of the Hammer Guard killed. And also now that is prompting Linden to utilise their javelins to try and kill the Hammer Guard off, because the Hammer Guard could be a real problem. If they were to push through this line and start causing havoc in behind, that could be just the sort of thing which the Dwarves could use to start really pulling ahead in this fight. As the Noldering Guard continue to fight hard. Meanwhile, if we hop over to the other side here, you can see that this unit of Eldar Makar, which again was probably being used to try and slow the Dwarves down, failed in their mission. We now have some Imladris Guardians and some Fall Linden Pikemen who are going to have to try and stop Erebor's initial attack over here as well, made up of Ironfoot Warriors. The Imladris Guardians should be able to hold them up for a time, but they will still need some support. And already, I think Linden's Javelins are going to have to be are becoming ever more important. More and more Javelins raining down on this Dwarven front line. But yeah, the Dwarves here, I thought for a second they were going to make the mistake of simply sending up the 4th Legion without reinforcing them quickly enough, but fortunately the 3rd Legion were just in behind them, and that is proving to be pretty decisive over here. The Imladris and Linden joint pipeline over here has crumbled pretty quickly. These Ironfoot Hammer Guard, for the most part, are just being used as something to distract, I think, because they're not really going to achieve all that much. There's so many pikes around them that if they stop moving and get caught in melee, they're probably going to get killed off pretty quickly. There's javelins being thrown all over the place. The Noldering Guard are being overwhelmed at this point in time. The pikes not enough to back them up. There's some Dwarven miners as well, but they are also being focused down by archer fire, and they will die off pretty quickly as a result of that. Orc hunters that are out of ammunition also moving forward. I think it might be a good opportunity actually this to slow things up a little bit, because everything is happening very quickly. Meanwhile, the Imladris Guardians have charged in with the support of the pikes. Without outside interference, I would fully expect the Imladris Guardians to defeat the Ironfoot Warriors fairly easily. But there is ranged influence from both sides, although with Fall Linden Marines moving forward as well. things could get pretty ugly for the Ironfoot Warriors. Meanwhile over here you can see just how quickly the dwarves came forward, and this is, again, it does support my arguments in many ways that I very rarely see layered defences as being worth it, because it encourages this sort of thing. You know, Sareg saw that this outer defence was not all that well manned, so rather than just filing in his units individually, like I imagine the Elven player was expecting, he just grouped all his units up and smashed through this choke point. And that is the problem. I mean, if you do layer your defence, you are inviting the enemy to do that. And Khazad-dûm are, as the dwarves, obviously high mass, they're able to do that. The orcs as well would be especially good at that, because they also have the disposable troops, so the losses you often take by engaging in such tactics will not faze them. Meanwhile, these javelins continuing to do some damage to the dwarves over here, but for the most part the dwarves have had a fairly comfortable ride of it so far. Not to say they haven't taken losses, but they've certainly taken the better of this engagement thus far. While some Harlinden infantry have been moved over to reinforce, some Harlinden Marines also getting caught out. Again, I haven't seen a lot of these players before, so I would assume they're newer players, so this also is a pretty good contrast to the last game, where the last game pretty much veterans from way back when the mod was sort of first released, so to speak. Whereas this, I've seen Sareg play a few games before, but no one else, I don't think. Proxima Centuri I think I've seen in a game or two before as well, but other than that I think we're dealing with fairly new players. More javelins coming in, but the Dwarven archers doing their best to thin out the Linden javelins as much as they can, seeing the danger that they pose. Although with the reinforcements over here, the Harlinden infantry, the dwarves do need to be careful that they don't run out of manpower. Their attack needs to maintain its momentum. Over here though, the elves also starting to shoot into the sides over here. Imladris Guardians. You can see now that with the reinforcements coming forward from the dwarves, particularly the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin, it's going to get pretty dicey for the elves over here as well. So the dwarves have been very aggressive so far. They've utilised a lot of their resources. They haven't actually pushed too far into the settlement just yet, but the elves do still need to be pretty cautious as the fight goes on. Because if they are unable to stop the Dwarven momentum, then this battle is only heading in one direction. And we're heading towards the final 10,000 frames, which has been quick, but then there was a fairly long deployment phase and also a fairly long bout of manoeuvring. Also, it is a 2v3 as opposed to the usual sort of 5v3s that you see on a map like Rivendell. You can see some Imladris Blade Masters coming forward, as well as some more Harlinden pikemen trying to slow the dwarves down. And to be fair, they will do a good job against Ironfoot Warriors, but the Dragon Slayers are sitting in here and they're going to be causing trouble. And as long as Erebor keep up this assault, and as long as the assault is kept up on the other side, I'm not sure whether the elves are going to have the manpower to continue this. Sons of the Fallen have also been sent forward now, so we're seeing more and more elite units. The Khazad-dûm Reclaimers are being focused down by the Elven Archers, but again, there's only one unit of Elven Archers on station over here. There's still one of these War Goats over here, which I'm actually very surprised about. There's a lot of anti-cavalry units that were involved over here. The fact that he's still alive is a testament really to how difficult the Hammer Guard are to bring down. But the 3rd Legion and the 4th Legion working very nicely in tandem. The addition of a few elite units as well, like the Sons of the Fallen, has decided this fight. There's some Mithlond Marines on the front line with their unique shields. But while they do make very good makeshift line infantry in this sort of situation, they are thoroughly outmatched. And honestly, the problem with Rivendell is it's actually pretty difficult to defend the central settlement because there's so many roads that generally the attackers can start to circumvent your defences. See what the defenders can think up. Some Noldering Guard coming over here. I think, by the looks of things, they're maybe trying to focus down this Erebor assault first. Which is understandable, I suppose. I mean, the Ironfoot Warriors are not as strong as the Legion units from Khazad-dûm. There's also some arrow fire hitting their backs, trying to whittle down the Dwarven manpower a little bit. Let's go and see what Sareg's army is doing. Nice low res water there. It looks as though he's trying to push his archers forward, engaging a bit of a skirmish fight. You can see there are some dead bodies over here from the elves, Harlinden Guard and Fallen. So that seems very, very likely, but as a result the elves are being pushed back and they will be surrendering the high ground, which means the Orc Hunters can position themselves up on the cliff and shoot down into the elves. I'm be interested to see what the elves intend to do, because they don't really have the manpower here to put up a defence on 3 or so choke points, which they will need to if it comes down to it. If they get pushed away from the outer choke points, they will need to cover at least 3 roads wherever they set up. Ironfoot warriors may be starting to struggle a little bit. The addition of this Noldering Guard over here, a big factor, but the Dragon Slayers are still sitting in here, still doing damage. There's also the Ironfoot Axe Throwers moving forward and Obsidian Guard, so there's no rest for the weary here from an Elven perspective. Here comes that Hammer Guard, still running around. Is he going to charge into the archers, stop them from firing? He's just having a good time. He's going to charge into the back of the Noldering Guard, I think, or something. Not the best charge. Probably going to get taken out here as well, considering the fact there are pikes all around him. And now you can see Khazad-dûm starting to advance inside the settlement. And he did get taken down, I'm fairly sure. Obsidian Guard on the front line now, but this is where the elves are probably going to start to sweat. Thank you, announcer. But the dwarves able to push through this outer defence over here. Now, it did cost them. You know, the manpower of Proxima Centauri's army is a little lower, but they are still nonetheless destroying the Elven defences systematically. The Highborns of Erebor supporting his Khazad-dûm ally, taking over this section, so Dane is putting himself in harm's way here. Also got more Reclaimers, the Sons of the Fallen, the Orc Hunters also returning fire. Eldaranwe Herubetzhal, just one of them. You can see now Gwathi Arthand moving forward in Mladris Guardians. The elves trying desperately to set up another defence, but the problem is they could probably set up a defence to hold back the Erebor and Khazad-dûm armies over on this side, but they still have to worry about Sareg. All of that green in the bottom corner. His army is still continuing its march towards Elrond's house. The House of Elrond, I should say. Javelins being thrown in again. And you can see that when the quantity of Elven skirmishers is not overwhelming, the dwarves can withstand a lot of punishment. Ooh, catching one in the head there, one of those fallen archers. And you know it's time for desperate measures when you're committing forward Fallen archers to try and hold the front line. To be fair, they are fighting axe throwers, but it's 2 units of axe throwers and they are in much greater numbers. You can see that there are still fire arrows just raining down on these units over here. Yeah, and unfortunately for the elves here, this is something which definitely tells me these are newer players involved, because he sent forward a single unit of Gwathi Arthand to try and hold the line on their own. They were never going to be able to do that, not against this Dwarven force here. They do have some Mladris Guardians, to be fair, but it's not a very cohesive line, this. It wasn't set up in time. The dwarves were able to just make a mockery of it, really. The Highborns of Erebor also supporting the Sons of the Fallen, so you have the Gwathi Arthand. Really not having a good time of it, and you can see they're still trying to set up layers, but unfortunately for them, it's really going against them here. Obsidian Guard, still looking pretty healthy. Ironfoot Axe Throwers picking off these elves one by one. The elves do still have an army remaining. But again, you know, trying to shoot like this again tells me that they're newer players, because this really is just a really inefficient way to use your skirmishers, especially Elven skirmishers. Elven skirmishers, which are usually so pinpoint accurate, you take away a huge amount of their accuracy when you make them take shots like that. Gwathi Arthand will be difficult to bring down, but ultimately they're not really going to be able to get many kills in return, especially when they're up against units as sturdy as the Highborns. Linden Archers and Littlon Pikemen forming up a sort of secondary line, although to be honest with you, things are very rapidly going against the elves here. There's more Khazad-dûm Reclaimers back there. The guards of Khazad-dûm have not even become involved yet. God Heli Mainauer, Eldaranwe Harugwinga, they need to get closer to the action. Over here, to be fair, the Erebor advance is looking a little bit more haggard. They've got a few units of Ironfoot Warriors, Ironfoot Crossbowmen, and the Dragon Slayers are still over here. But I think for the most part Erebor have also sent their forces around with Khazad-dûm. You can see that the Obsidian Guard are already on their way over to lend a hand. Let's go see what's happening up here. And yeah, you can see here that Sareg, when the elves surrendered the high ground, he immediately sent forward his Orc Hunters of Khazad-dûm. He's now just going to start raining death down upon the elves, and also he's targeting some of the Linden skirmishes over here, the Harlinden Guard. They may have a slight shield value, but considering the terrain advantage the dwarves have, I'm not even sure the Harlinden Guard would be able to get very many good hits on them. You can't even see the Dwarven firing lines. But you can see that the elves, they don't really know what to do here. You can almost see the minds of the players as they get pushed and pulled all around the battlefield. Over here, meanwhile, see the Ironfoot Axe Throwers and the Dragon Slayers of Arid Mithrin going up against some Noldorin Blade Masters and some Mithlon Pikemen. Fire arrows streaking by into the Ironfoot Crossbowmen. Ironfoot Warriors coming forward as well to reinforce. And they could, again, surround these elves over here, which the Noldorin Blade Masters will be difficult to bring down, but considering the fact they've got Dragon Slayers over here and a numbers advantage, they should be just fine, you would imagine. Hefty amount of Elven skirmishes over here, focusing their fire on the crossbowman and the axe throwers. Khazad-dûm reclaimers on their way over, presumably to try and help against the Noldorin Blade Masters. The pikemen finally came forward, but it's far, far too late. Coming forward to help the Gwaith the Arthan, but there's only 7 of them remaining. See here the Obsidian Guard. This is probably going to be a walkover, to be honest with you. There goes the Imladris General. Elrond killed in his own city. Imladris Guardians. Yeah, this is a really very one-sided fight, but it still works as educational material, I suppose. Don't set out your defense like the elves did here. And also, obviously it'll be a learning experience because these are clearly newer players for the most part that are playing here. It just goes to show what you can and can't get away with in a siege. And to be fair, I mean, you know, Reforged has become a lot more complicated over the course of development. Third Age Reforged Vanilla was a much simpler game than Reforged is. There's a lot more interaction between the units, a lot more unit types in Reforged to learn than there was in Vanilla, where you can just sort of get away with doing the basic things. Pikes in front, archers behind, etc. But in Reforged you need to be a little bit more savvy, a bit more of a learning process involved, and I'm sure that the Elven players here will take that on board. Well, here are the Khazad-dûm reclaimers. Axes being thrown. And considering the difficulties that the dwarves had in the last battle, trying to go across and advance across the river into that Linden line, it ended up being very close, of course, but the dwarves, they were still limited in what they could do based on their army pick. This does show that, given the right situation, the dwarves can cause real problems for the elves. Noldorin Blade Masters pushing through the lines and getting slaughtered for it. Even the Wardens of Elos Tyrion being pushed heavily on the defensive. And again, I'm not really sure they did all that much damage at all. Sareg, who almost certainly here is by far and away the most experienced player in this game, I think. Knows exactly what to target with his archers, the Wardens of Elos Tyrion, trying to run. But just being focused down by the Orc Hunters. Sareg's army is now getting into the settlement as well. There's really very little in terms of resistance that the elves can offer at this point, you would imagine. Still a few units of Eldar Enway here and there. Mithlon Pikemen. Victory seems certain. One of the few times you've seen that for the elves in this game. Noldorin Blade Master as well, hunting down what's left of the crossbowmen, so at the very least the elves have managed to kill off the Erebor skirmishers, which seem to be the target of their ire for a long time in this battle. Again, a unit of Eldar Enway Haru Hatal moving forward, but again the Mithlon Pikemen were largely all dead by the time they got there. And still the Dwarven Juggernaut rolls forward, the Highborns of Erebor showing no signs of slowing down. See the Legion Bodyguard also moving forward. The Dwarves are going to have units to spare in this battle, I think it's fair to say. Again, I'm sure that this fight will probably get a couple of dislikes based on how one-sided it really is. But again, as far as educational material, I think that it still has some value. Again, if I had my way, I would probably have used a closer fight, but again, as I've said in the past, I don't really have time these days to pick and choose or be so picky. I just need to record what I can when I can, so you know, don't blame me for it too much if you take exception to how one-sided this fight was. Mithril Guard moving forwards, as well as some Legion Bodyguard. The Khazad-dûm Reclaimers just throwing their axes all over the place at this point. They may as well throw them up in the air in celebration, to be honest. I mean, some Noldorin Blade Masters attacking the rear of this Dwarven line, which, to be fair, is starting to look a little bit more thin on the ground. But it doesn't matter too much, because now there's more reinforcements. Legion Bodyguard coming forward to, once again, give the Dwarves the definitive advantage. Here we can see some Khazad-dûm Reclaimers getting into melee. There's that animation again, where the corpses spasm and then go into a 2D T-pose. It's always a very strange one, that. It only happens with certain units as well, mostly two-hander units, it's very weird. Meanwhile, these Orc Hunters getting some nice crossfire here onto the Eldaranwe Haruquinga. Their armour values mean they will be a little bit more resilient than most. But even so, they are still taking point-blank arrow fire. Chaos in the Elven ranks has already set in. Noldorin Guard just sort of hanging out in the town centre, but at this point it's just a case of how long the elves can hold on for. God Helym in melee, but they're up against Mithril Guard. Usually the God Helym will be very good in melee, but in this case, less so. What have we here? Some Haruquinga just sort of running around all over the place. More Khazad-dûm Reclaimers. Legion Bodyguard once again in here now, reinforcing the line. Be interested to see if Dane actually lives through this fight. He's definitely put himself in the meat grinder here alongside his highborns. Yeah, there's really no way back for the elves. A really very one-sided fight. Let's see here. Aha. We finally see the guards of Khazad-dûm in action, and they will have no equal at this stage in the battle. As the dwarves of Khazad-dûm start to sweep forwards. I'm not really seeing how the elves have got much of anything left, really. They've got some Wardens of Elos Tyrian, some very depleted units over here. Some Eldaranwe Haruquinga. I think Sareg's issue is simply that his army haven't been able to keep up with how quickly the elves have been crumbling here, so a lot of his units probably have not even seen fighting yet. His two allies, meanwhile, at the very least their armies are certainly bloodied, but they are moving forward. I think Erebor, for the most part, has probably taken the most casualties here. And the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers coming in with their big two-hander axes, doing some damage. Really very, very little the elves have left, so I'm kind of surprised that the fight is lasting as long as it is. So we'll go up to ×2 speed here just to finish this off. The Dwarven announcer really needs to have a cough suite or something. Yeah, well, this is obviously going to be the end. Don't think there's anything left over here. Nope. Wardens of Elos Tyrian, pretty good in melee for rangers, but here, yeah, there goes the bearded elf.
Our men have taken control of the castle.
Very much a walkover, this. 40% the differential in favour of the dwarves, but again, at the very least, I'm sure it'll be interesting to see, because at the time of recording this, I haven't actually released the river crossing battle yet. I'd be interested to see how many people claim Linden is like ridiculously OP as a result of that, and then to see this afterwards. Although to be fair, Khazad-dûm are a point of contention on the Discord, shall we say, for how strong they are. But yeah, very clear victory. I'm sure that there's probably going to be dislikes based on how clear the victory was, but again, don't blame me too much for that, for the reasons that I said before. Highest amount of kills on the field, Erebor. Interesting. I guess I can see why. You know, the amount of skirmishes they used, the amount of damage they did quite quickly. Linden got a lot of damage, mainly because of the javelins. Imladris usually can go toe-to-toe with the dwarves, but again, I think both of these players that were on the defence, very much new players, because their defence, to be brutally honest, was very badly organised. Let's have a look here at what did the damage for Sareg. I mean, nothing got over 100 kills for him. Some Orc Hunters got over 100 kills, however, for Proxima Centauri. But obviously, with the unit scaling being what it was, there was never really going to be huge kill counts here as you might expect from a big siege like this. But yes, for educational purposes, this one will be posted up. I'm sure that people will maybe, don't be too harsh on Sareg for sending this one in, because I do kind of feel as though he probably sent this one to me because it was such a clear win for him and his team. But even so, it is still worth showing, just for the fact that this is what you don't do when you're defending against the dwarves. You really don't want to set up your defense in very flimsy layers, because they will just smash through them one by one, especially Khazad-dûm. And I don't think that Sareg just sent this one to me just because he wanted people to see him beating up on players who are new to the game. So don't be too harsh on him. But I hope you enjoyed this for what it was. Again, just a few pointers more than anything else, rather than a spectacle fight. We will be returning to sort of a larger spectacle fight next time. I think I still have a 4 versus 3 that I have in the chamber. We shall see. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.